So here's another example of us using the quadratic formula. Let's see, so we just immediately can place this into our values a, b, and c because it's in the correct format. Ax squared plus bx plus c is equal to 0. So I'm going to say that a equals 3, and then we have b equals minus 2, and c equals minus 20. There we go. All right, this one becomes a little bit more complex. We have a little bit larger numbers and a value of a that is not 1, so it might just be a little bit trickier. We'll see. All right, so plugging into our formula, we have x equals negative b. Remember, this means that the sign of b will flip. It always changes from what we have right here. So negative b becomes negative 2. Double negative becomes a plus 2. Plus or minus, don't forget the plus or minus, both of them. The square root of b squared, so I'm going to keep that in brackets, minus 2 squared, and then minus 4 times a is 3 times c is minus 20, and then that's all, remember that fraction line goes over everything, all divided by 2 times a, which is 3. All right, again, we always start underneath of the square root, so over here I'm going to come and simplify that separately. So underneath the square root, we have minus 2 squared. That's a minus 2 times a minus 2. That sign is really, really important, so make sure you get that bit correct. That's why I put this into brackets originally. Minus 2 times minus 2 is 4. And then again, I always just check the sign of this bit first before I do the calculation. So I have 2 negative signs. If I multiply 2 negatives together, that gives me a plus. And then I think about the values. So 4 times 3 is 12, times 20, I know 12 times 2 is 24, and then we have that extra 0. So 240, and then let's add those together. So 4 plus 240 is 244. Let's see if that simplifies. Just gonna use my calculator there, it does. Simplifies to 2 times the square root of 61. You could have come over here and done the proper surd, whatever, simplification, but just to save time, I'm just gonna quickly go for that. All right, so moving forward, again, I'm gonna go back to this. We just want to recopy everything, but instead of writing this whole entire square root, I'm just going to replace that with 2 times the square root of 61. So we'll have 2 plus or minus, instead of the square root here, it's replaced by 2 root 61 from there. And then I'm dividing everything by 2 times 3, which is 6. Okay, if they had asked us to simplify this as much as possible, I would split this up because I have 2 terms on the top that are both separately being divided by the 1 term that's on the bottom. So you could write this as 2 separate fractions. See how I just copied the top over? And then that plus or minus will just stay in the middle. And then each of those terms on the top are both separately being divided by 6. Everybody on the top gets divided by 6. So divide by 6, divide by 6. The way we simplify this is just by taking each fraction individually. So here's a fraction, and here's a fraction, and I'll simplify them individually. 2 over 6 becomes 1 over 3, both divisible by 2. Bring down the plus minus. When you're simplifying something like this with the surd, you only need to look at the values in front. Just like we had over here, 2 over 6 becomes 1 over 3. The 1 on the top becomes kind of like the coefficient of this surd. So we don't really need to show that 1. So this would just become square root of 61 over 3. It's kind of like you have that 1 right here, but we're smart enough not to show that. It's an invisible 1, right? So if they asked you to simplify, that could be your answer. However, I think they want this in, I don't know, let's just say 3 sig figs. Significant figures. So again, I'll bring out the calculator. Let's see, so we're going to have, what was my answer? 1/3. So I have, let's see how I do this, 1 over 3 plus the square root of 61, wow, can't type, plus square root of 61 over 3, and and there's my decimal. So we have 2.94 in 3 significant figures, and then I'll just go back and edit that to become minus. See how it kind of just combines it all together? That's okay. You don't have to leave it separate. If the denominators do match, it can be combined all together like so. So we have our second answer is minus 2.27. So we have 2 answers there. And remember, I'll always go back and say this. These represent the x-intercept values of our quadratic graph if we were looking at where they would cross the x-axis. So that's one thing to always, always, always keep in mind. All right, keep practicing these types of questions. It's just useful in order to get into the habit of using this formula. There are a few little tricky things that you might run into, but as long as you've practiced this enough, you'll become comfortable, especially with using that plus or minus, and then evaluating this within the square root. The more you practice, the more comfortable with all of this you will become.